All right, for the independents, here's what we need to look at them again. The first thing is Enlightenment philosophers. You do need to know the basic ideas, what philosopher and what ideas. I'm not going extremely deep in it. You're going to find there's one that you're going to have to definitely know a lot about there. First of all is Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes, his philosophy is that people are like animals. And if we don't have something to make us enforce the rules, we will act like beasts and animals. So that's why we need a government to basically curb for our beastly nature. He actually had said at the time that government, and he kind of espoused the idea, and this is where the world history comes in, that you have the kings, that God gave them that power. So thinking of like Louis XIV and that idea. Montesquieu. Now Montesquieu will write about how for government we need to have separate powers of one group that makes the laws, one group that enforces it, one group that interprets the laws, and have some checks and balances to make sure that no one group or person gets too powerful. Does that sound pretty familiar? This is where Montesquieu's ideas that he wrote pretty much a century before we became a country is what our Constitution and James Madison bases on. Voltaire will write a lot about freedoms and think about liberties that people should have. And intellectual freedom is something that we actually will espouse in our Constitution. The ideas of copyrights and patents, and you should get rewarded for that. But the biggest one that we kind of have is the idea for religion. Not so much against religion, the idea that there is no one state religion. You cannot say we are Catholic, we are Islam. The idea that we have this separation of church and state. Same thing that Roger Williams had with Rhode Island. And we will find that Jefferson and Madison in writing the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, the idea of the Establishment Clause comes from that. Now, John Locke will write in the Two Treatises of Civil Government that people have natural rights, rights that are given to them by God. He says that we have 3 natural rights. What are our 3 natural rights?
Life, liberty, and originally was the right to own property.
Okay, it is. Life, liberty, and property. John Locke said, life, you have the right to live. God gave you that right. These are God-given rights. Liberty, your rights for freedom. And he said for property. Now, later on, we will end up with a little bit different with Jefferson's pursuit of happiness. The last guy, which I have no idea if the Rousseau, Lake Rousseau has anything to do with him here in Citrus County, but with Rousseau, he wrote social contract. The idea of social contract is that we have a contract as people with the government, and if the government doesn't uphold their end of protecting our rights, we have the right to overthrow that government. So that's where he kind of combines the different things together. He says that we do need a government, taking Hobbes' idea, but the government is beholden to the people. Here's a quote from Jefferson: "Tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." Again, some of that idea of that social contract. Now, natural rights, going back to the deeper part, and this is where for the Declaration of Independence that we see, where John Locke had it. The idea that we have, again, these are God-given rights, but the moral sense, and the idea that what are our moral values are more important than the government. So it kind of takes that social contract idea and these get combined together. 2 phrases that we will have: consent of the government, govern, and live in a government. And even today with our Tea Party, this is part of the ideas that they have in there, that we have a smaller government. And you're going to see these words directly in or indirectly in there. The Declaration of Independence. And our natural rights are superior to government. Again, he's kind of taking that idea that Rousseau had of social contract. So if government becomes too powerful over your natural rights of life, liberty, and property, then you start over. We do have an American that is semi-philosopher. This guy is Thomas Paine. Now I say semi because he was a writer. He's not put in the same sense as the Enlightenment philosophers, but he influences America. Now he writes Common Sense. And in Common Sense, he tells in just common, ordinary ways why we as Americans should break away from Britain, why we are different, why we are American. And he uses some of the ideas that the philosophers have. He says we are a new breed of people. We are more violent. We are more independent. We are more socially mobile, more economically mobile. So he takes those ideas and then came for America. Now, Thomas Paine is a rabble-rouser. And you all might have a friend that's like it, that is a person that they're pretty smart, in some ways maybe a little bit lazy, but they can whip something up and it sounds really good. If things are a little bit boring, they're going to cause a little bit of controversy anyways, and have a little bit of drama, just to spice it up a little bit. And that is where Paine's kind of that way. But for America, he really did help us and get a lot of normal Americans that read his pamphlet of Common Sense and say, hey, we should break away. Later on in the war, and I usually end up forgetting when we get into the Revolutionary War because there's so many other things, when things are going really bad, he writes another pamphlet called The America Crisis. And he talks about the sunshine, soldier, and patriot. Basically, people that are all for you when things sound good. But what about when it goes bad? All right, and people that will stick through. And kind of this was an idea of let's finish the fight. And it did actually help a lot of things during the Revolutionary War. Now, after the Revolutionary War, he goes to France. He is actually a part of the French Revolution. Again, he is a rabble-rouser. When that gets over, he comes back to America. He ends up being despised by a lot of people in America because later on in his life, he will write basically criticizing religion, saying that it was something just to control the masses and the ignorant. Kind of goes through and breaks down with every religion and telling what things were wrong with it. And actually, when he has died, he is pretty much buried, and there was no celebration of his life. We kind of forget about his later writings today and focus on what was his impact with Common Sense, mainly, and his writings as we became our own country. Now, going back for the history, where it's not just one thing. It's not like in 1776, a bunch of people showed up in Philadelphia and said, hey, let's break away. And here's where you have to look back and say, what are the influences? The Dominion of New England. Remember early on, some of those New England colonies got together during the English Civil War, Glorious Revolution. And for a little bit, they were united together. But England didn't like that. They broke them up. Ben Franklin will have the Albany Plan of Union. Once again, trying to unite us together. We don't go with this, but this idea of coming together, getting united. The Stamp Act Congress, when we had something that a lot of people did not like, we will have 9 colonies come together. And they organize these boycotts. They get rid of the Stamp Act, and they kind of, again, start becoming united. We will have the First Continental Congress, which doesn't do a whole lot at that time, but it does set the stage a little bit for Lexington and Concord. But they do plan to meet again the next year, and when they meet at the Second Continental Congress, this is the one that we're going to see, and this is the one that we're going to kind of look at and see how deep you end up getting with the Second Continental Congress, and this is the one that makes the Declaration of Independence.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is that N-E at the top of the head of the thing?
New England. Instead of putting Connecticut, Rhode Island, they just make it New England. They're all the smaller ones. But and again, this is, even though most people think of this, and this idea will continue on for revolution, that's actually during the French and Indian War with Franklin's Albany Plan of Union. All right, the Second Continental Congress. They meet in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is the largest city. It is the most cosmopolitan city. It is pretty much in the middle of the colonies. They elect as their president John Hancock. Why John Hancock?
Wasn't he like the biggest smuggler of the time?
Well, he was a smuggler,
Right.
which you look at it, so they're going to elect a person that's doing stuff illegal?
He really did not get along with the king.
Yeah, the king wanted him put away because he was a smuggler. He was a major, today you kind of think of it as almost like a drug lord, except for it wasn't drugs, he was getting the stuff that people wanted, but to avoid the tax. But yeah, for him,
They were drug respected.
well, but
Get the tea, honey.
tea, glass, I mean, those things like that you were having smuggling. He was extremely wealthy, but it kind of tells, and in some ways, this is where you kind of look at things and you say, all right, were the Americans kind of doing a little bit of a kick to a king? When they meet together, they pick somebody that, although he's respected, he's doing illegal things. So this is where you kind of see with him. No, it's not because he's famous for his signature, not yet. All right. Early on, they write what is called the Olive Branch Petition. Now, what does it mean when you send an olive branch, Mark?
It's kind of like an extension of peace.
Yeah, a peace. Now, it wasn't quite exactly in these words, but it was pretty much along this line. Dear King, we're really sorry about what happened in Lexington and Concord and the killing of your soldiers. We really do want to get along and get back together. Hugs and kisses, the Colonies. Now, if you are the King of England, King George III, what are you going to do when you get this letter?
Not even
Oh,
read
I
it.
love you guys.
Yeah, he didn't read it and he just burnt it, if I'm not mistaken.
Officially, now this is where, what he'd do with it, officially he would not even read it. Because he would not recognize a group of people that were committing treason. They were not, that is officially. Did he read it?
Yeah.
Yeah, he read it. I mean, officially, no. I have no idea. Anything coming from the Continental Congress, I do not even look at. All right. If he didn't technically read it, somebody in his staff read it and told him what it says. But basically, he said, I don't care. But what it was, this is where, for some people, they look. Before we break away, we need to try diplomacy. Let's make sure. All right, let's see. Is there anything we can do and get back together with England? They will then write what is called the Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms.
So they're saying, give us what we want or we're going to fight you.
In a roundabout way. And that is what they're saying, which is the taking up of arms. Why causes necessity for taking up arms? This is actually a way of writing of saying why something illegal is legal. Now, anyone know what brilliant young person will end up writing
Thomas
this?
Jefferson.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson gets really good at writing something and saying why something illegal is legal. So, why is it that we should be allowed to take up arms against the king and his army and his government? In many ways, this is another rough draft to the Declaration of Independence. And again, Jefferson is the one, and this is where he emerges. When I say young, when he writes the Declaration of Independence, he's 33 years old. You may not think of that as young, but think about the age of, if you were looking at the State of Union address the other night, there weren't too many people that are government leaders that were under the age of 50 in that building. Because normally you have to prove yourself earlier in life. So we have someone, and Thomas Jefferson is one of the most brilliant men in world history, not American history. He is a great writer. He is a philosopher. He is a great musician. He is an engineer. He is a scientist. Probably one of the only things that he was bad at was he was a bad businessman. Which is why we'll find later on that even though he personally does not believe in slavery and wants to get rid of the slaves, he financially cannot. Because he has a hard time managing business. And the only business that he has, his plantation loses money constantly, except for one part, which he actually has a blacksmith section, which he has young black boys that are slaves that are making nails, and that basically pays for his expenses and keeps his head above water financially. And so even though, I mean, he will write in the Declaration, even originally, it'll be cut out, but he writes originally about how slavery is wrong, and he personally had decided he was going to free all his slaves, but he doesn't until his death. So it's one of those moral dilemmas that he has. All right, the Committee of Five. Three of these names are going to be, before we get to that, the Declaration, the proposal was made by Richard Henry Lee, and you're going to get to know Richard Henry Lee thoroughly. But this is where you are for Richard Henry Lee. It is not Thomas Jefferson. Now, Lee is not the person that was one of the loudest. We're going to have John Adams, who over and over and over again will try to have Congress make this declaration. But John Adams is like some of your friends. Except for, unlike Thomas Paine, where you kind of like stuff with Thomas Paine there, John Adams is one of those really smart people, but every time they say something, because it came out of his mouth, it annoys you. You know the person's right, but you won't want to go along with it just because he's so annoying there. So you're waiting for someone else to say it there. Well, this is where Richard Henry Lee does come, which is important that he does, because anyone have a guess of what state Lee is from?
Virginia.
Yeah, Virginia. And Virginia is the most powerful state, so when a person from Virginia does it, which he will then leave the Continental Congress for a while to be governor of Virginia, because that was more important than stuff for being together. But the Committee of Five was made to write this declaration. John Adams, Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson are names you recognize. Roger Sherman is another person on it. Roger Sherman is a very respected man from Connecticut. He is seen by a lot of people. He's not extremely rich, but he is one that a lot of people look at really with common sense. And a lot of people felt if he's there, you can really trust what these people are doing, because Roger Sherman's not going to try to do anything sneaky. Then there was Robert Livingston, and Robert Livingston is one of the most important early Americans we have that most people don't know anything about. He is on this committee for writing the Declaration. He'll be a big part of the Constitution. He is the person that negotiates the deal to give us the Louisiana Purchase. The problem with what Robert Livingston is the time period that he was living at. By the time you go after Adams, Franklin, Jefferson, Madison, Washington, all of these people that are founding fathers, you kind of forget about someone like a Livingston. When other times in history, he would have been real important. But they together are the ones that write it. But like for most things, when you have a group, what happens when you have group work?
I end up
One person does all the work and everyone else just has to do
Everyone, I
it.
have a hard time believing you're the
No,
one
no.
doing all the
I'm
work.
gonna bring in something from 6th grade. It was my favorite thing that I ever did.
So you peaked. You academically peaked in 6th grade. Is that what
I
you're saying?
picked up my whole group's work. All 5 of us worked. I had to draw the anatomy of the body, and then I even did a background. And I ate Apple Jacks that night, so that was the background color.
Now, whenever it comes to like a drawing project or anything that has to do with like art, I'm always the one that has to do all the art stuff.
It was the best thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
Well, and this is what ends up happening. It's a group project, but Jefferson's the one that ends up writing it. Or does he?
He actually, didn't he get blamed for stealing it from other people?
And this is where the ideas he has, those Enlightenment writers, and remember I had in yesterday's notes the 1774 revolution. All these individual areas and colonies that are breaking away. He took things from them. Now, what he wrote was pretty much original. I mean, he took ideas from other things and put it together. So, where I say, or did he? One other thing to remember, and you're going to see when we're watching the movie, you're going to see where these letters are. But Abigail Adams, the whole time that they are discussing this, is writing to her husband. Now, this is almost a forgotten art, and the language that was used. And I know that some of you, yes, you have love texts back and forth to each other. May not be at quite the level of if you hadn't seen a person, you haven't talked to them for a couple of months, and you're writing back and forth, and writing every night. And that's why when you read, even when you read World War II, and you read letters that were sent back and forth to each other. But at this time, we have the letters. Abigail Adams is writing to her husband and saying about how women need to be equal, and how do not forget them, remember the ladies, is kind of the quote in there that we have. Which of course we do. All men are created equal, right?
Right.
Yeah, white landowning men.
Yeah.
You said Richard Henry Lee's gonna be really big. Is he like Henry Clay big? Or
No. He's proposing this. He's going to be at time for history. His family is big.
Is he related
But like
to
one of
Ely?
Jay's
He is Robert E. Lee's uncle.
I'm so good.
So,
Good job, Brian.
his brother is General Henry Lighthorse Lee, who is George Washington's one of his leading cavalry officers.
So Jefferson wrote most of it, or?
Jefferson is the one that wrote it, but he took things from all kinds of other people. All right, what are some problems that would cause with passing the Declaration? Why would it be some people that would be against the Declaration?
They're in fear.
All right, what are they in fear of?
The king.
One's the most powerful country in the world.
Yeah, Britain just got done fighting a war, and if we were to say for rankings, they're number 1, and they beat when 2, 3, and 4 all together were fighting against them. So they are the most powerful country in the world. So a lot of people were afraid of that. What are some other problems we're going to have?
The all men are created equal.
Slavery issue. All men are created equal. Not so much for the women side of this and there, but the slavery issue. All right, and this is where, again, Jefferson writing that in the original. There was about 600-700 words that were eliminated out of the Declaration that Jefferson originally had. But the slavery issue will be brought up. And one other thing that we have.
Land.
That'll be with the articles. That'll actually be a big argument after we get to that.
Well, we have security, basically. Like,
Well, that kind of goes with the fear of fighting each other and how much, and it actually comes to security. How much united can we be? And this is what is the name of our country?
United States of America.
What is a state?
A colony.
No. It is an independent country. The very first thing I do in government, my very first thing of notes is a state is a country.
So I have been to multiple countries.
Yeah. We are the United States of America because they were 13 independent countries. They united together for one reason. Why did they unite together?
To fight the king.
Huh?
To be free.
Yeah, to be free. Get rid of the king. All right, that is why now where we emerge from there, and that's what we'll have with our next section of this. So, how
So
much
13
power do you have for
kindergartners on
each
one high
state
school.
compared to this United States, this confederation that will form? All right, now looking at the words here, this is the preamble to the Declaration. Notice some of these phrases that are underlined that might have come from some of our Enlightenment ideas. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth that the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. I know all you Harperites in there are saying that's a sentence.
No, I did that in
Alright.
Sheldon.
Wait, how many words is
Mother
that?
of God, that's a sentence?
That's one sentence,
How
yes.
many words is that?
I don't know.
We
Man, I
need
can-
we
if
have
that's
a
over
Harvard
25.
challenge in the future where we have to like beat the past record for having a grammatically correct sentence with like 200.
Oh, okay.
Wait. Are you
Well,
serious?
here we go to the next part then. When we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among the men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter and to abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying in its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
In other words, if we, like a majority of the United States believes that our government is corrupt and wrong, we could change it.
Well, and that's where yes, this is what we're saying. Thomas Jefferson is saying in here, again, here's the legal reasoning we have for doing something illegal. All right, we're going to stop there. Anyway.
Yes, movie.
Mark, you going to stop that?
Yeah.
So I rewrote "let her go" into "let me go." So the words may not fit all the way. I tried my best. I'm not the best lyricist, so. I was born with basic rights, but you tell me no. I don't want to fight, let these feelings grow. Only know it's over when I'm writing no. Set the taxes high, tell me what to grow. Soldiers on the roads and in my home. Only know it's over when I'm writing no.
things that we have are two different words you're going to need to know type of people. Loyalists. Loyalists are easy to remember because they are loyal to the king. These are Americans that did not want to break away. They are also referred to as Tories. That is more the British name that you have from where they have the Tory party, because in Britain they will have the Whigs and the Tories. Just like the intolerable acts and coercive acts, the College Board may interchange both of them. Not that they're trying to trick you, but that they think you should know both. And in your own writing, you can interchange those words you have. But these are people that are loyal to the king. Now, about a third of the Americans were loyal to the king, did not want to break away. So about what fraction of people were patriots and did want to break away? 2/3? No. Yeah, 1/3. I'll kind of come back to this a little bit later on. So we have 1/3 that want to break away, 1/3 that doesn't want to break away. What about the other third?
They're soldiers.
No, they're not soldiers.
And they don't care.
Yeah, they don't care. Do we have a third of the people today that just don't care about anything?
Yeah.
Pretty much. And if we were to have, I mean, whether even a presidential election which has the most people involved, you still have a third of the people that really don't care. Part of the reason is the fact that it may not affect them. And this is where most of the time these are people that are poor. If you're poor, does it really matter whether the king's the head of your government or there's some new government or who's president? And one reason why for a lot of times they're poor, they are the least educated. But this is where we will have a third of the people that really don't care one way or another what's happening in there. The biggest thing that you have to know, what are some reasons that someone might want to be a loyalist? Why stay loyal to the king?
If they're a royal governor, if they're given a position by the king himself.
Okay, you have a job by the king. Okay, it could be, you are working in his customs courts. And this is where a lot of the areas on the cities, or big cities on the coast, where most of the king's workers work. So, if you overthrow the government, you'll lose that job. What else?
Security, basically. Like if somebody else attacks, then you can't really trust.
And there's two ways for security. One, you have other countries, which Britain just in the last decades before that had defeated the 3 other biggest countries altogether, so they are the most powerful. The other thing is security if you are richer, that you're afraid of maybe a mob rule. You do have a government. You do have something there to keep control of things. What's another reason why you may?
If the revolution fails, you want to be on the right side.
Yeah, you want to be on the winning side. If it fails, what's the punishment for treason? Yeah, death. So that's where we have kind of go, and this is one that wasn't mentioned. Respect for the king. I mean, it kind of goes along a little bit with it for there, but the respect for authority, respect for the king. The idea for order and law. I'm going to use this word a lot of times about mobocracy, because this was going to come up about the mob that you have. Family ties, especially if you are from the South. How did South Carolina, how was it created? So you're thinking, what? Wait,
Plantation
that was
owners?
2 weeks ago. What?
Weren't all the people in the South plantation owners and all that?
Well, there are a lot of plantation owners, how they get their land.
When bringing people over.
Well, they had some of the head rights, but a lot of them were people that were relatives to the king and the royal family, that he gave a lot of them chunks of land. Reason why we have Georgia as a buffer colony to make sure the Spanish can't get up to some family. And we're going to find though that there's a lot more loyalists in the South than in the North, and that'll play into some of the plans for it. Work for the crown. That's where Maria had given that example. Church of England. We don't think of it this way because we're so used to the separation of church and state. But if you were part of the Anglican Church or the Church of England, they actually are supported by taxpayer money. So if you are in that church, your job, your pay could be cut if you end up losing. Part of the greatest country, want to be part of a winner, and some of those ideas that you have in here. Again, the rich. Now, here's where, even though we say a lot more of the rich are loyalists, when you compare to every other or most every other revolution that we have had in the world history, the American Revolution is very different in one way. The Russian Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, the French Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, all were done by the poor overthrowing the rich. We have the rich making just a different government. And that is where, for America, those 50-some odd men that made the Declaration of Independence, most of them were very wealthy. John Hancock is very wealthy. When we're watching the movie and you had the guy, Edward Rutledge, one of the richest men of all South Carolina. So we do have some of the rich that are there that are going in. And basically they're just wanting to change one government to another that they have. All right, now for the Patriots. These are the people that supported it. If you were King George III, what are you going to call the Patriots? Rebels? What else could you call them? Criminals? Traitors? Treasonous? I mean, this is where you're kind of the king. We always look at things as patriots, but that's the American point of view. If you're from the British point of view, we have this. And this is where I kind of went over what fraction were patriot, loyalists, okay, which is pretty much thirds that we have, and a third that really didn't care overall. Now, kind of looking through a couple of different groups of people. Were Quakers patriots or loyalists?
Neither.
Okay, why neither?
They don't like to fight.
Yeah, they're pacifists. There would be some backlash after the war because they did not get involved. That doesn't mean that all of them did not get involved. In fact, the most famous of all of our spies would be a Quaker, Nathan Hale.
Wait, what about Nathaniel Green?
Okay, yeah, and there are going to be a few others. It said not all, but now Nathan Hale's a good example of one that he wanted to uphold his religion, being a pacifist. He wanted to fight for independence, but he didn't want to actually fight. So he was a spy. He's famous for when he got caught. Supposedly it said the quote that I regret that I have yet but one life to give for my country. But this is where for him being a Quaker. All right, which side were the Native Americans on?
British.
All right, they are the British. Why the British? Weren't most of them fighting against them in the French and Indian War? So why are they supporting the British now and not the Patriots?
Because the British gave them the land after the French and Indian War.
Can you give me the SFI that goes with that?
Proclamation.
Yeah. They gave them the land and what they had, the Proclamation of 1763. And this is where for your writing, where I'm saying, you're saying this, then have that SFI. Boom, here's my evidence. The Proclamation of 1763 says that they are not to move. So the Native Americans are like, oh, the British are finally actually living up to their word. Were the Americans going to let them have that land? No, there wasn't any plan for that. How about slaves?
Both.
Okay. And it is both. It's kind of, this is where I know some of you want to have it where it's one way or another, but and some of you that have seen the movie The Patriot, there is some good history in The Patriot, there's some that's not so good, but you will find with one of the characters that's in the army where he comes as a slave and he reads a document that, or he has read a document that says that George Washington says if he serves a year, then he would be given manumission. He would be given freedom. So after that year passes, he's still serving, and they say, well, why are you still here? And he said, I'm here on my own accord now. The British, Governor Dunmore of Virginia will issue the same sort of thing, that if a slave fights on the side of the British, that they would be granted freedom after a certain amount of time. So that is where they actually fight on both sides. How about the Canadians? What side are they going to be on?
British.
Yeah, the British. We will find in the War of 1812, as well as in the Revolutionary War, that we as Americans, we go to Canada to try to help free them, and they, fighting alongside the British, defeat us and kick us back. At least the Canadians are nice enough and polite enough to not remind us of that fact, that they beat us both times. How about Floridians?
British.
Yeah, they're going to be on the side of the British. That's why it's 13 colonies, not the 17 colonies, because the 2 Canadian and the two Floridas stay with the British. Now, why does Florida stay with Britain?
Trade.
some trade, and this is where we actually look at, Florida was a welfare state. Britain, in the few years that they had, just over a decade, Britain did more to enhance Florida than Spain had done in the 25 years, or the 250 years before that. If you're ever up in the St. Augustine area, Palaca area, you have the Bardham Trail, you have the Kings Road. They started developing roads in different parts of Florida. And they were actually putting a lot of money into helping out Florida. So for Floridians, there wasn't a reason to break away that they had. And here's where when you look at a map going into the first part of the war. In the red, we have the 13 colonies. Notice some here. Maine is not Maine, but it is part of Massachusetts. Vermont is not given its own. This is where, at that time, we're kind of arguing over whether or not is Vermont part of New York, is it part of New Hampshire. Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys will be fighting though on the side of the colonists. You see it says Indian Reserve here, East Florida, West Florida. So that's where you kind of look at the map, and then Spain owns on this side of the Mississippi River. And here's where I'm going to put this in, because this is something we're kind of looking at, and I've always had, where's a place to put this, because this is something that's important that is easily forgotten. That western area that we have. First of all, George Washington. Is there anything that he has that could help him financially in us winning this war?
Yeah, didn't he and some other people put money into his land or something?
Right. This is where the reason why he was involved in the French and Indian War, he was part of a group of investors, today we call it like a giant development in the Ohio River Valley, which, if that land's given to the Indians, is he going to make any money off of that development? No. So for him, he is going to financially gain if we win this and we get that western land. A lot of times we look at our founding fathers, which they did sacrifice a lot, but they did have some personal reasons for it. And this is where, for George Washington, he did have a little bit with it. We're going to have Daniel Boone. Daniel Boone, who was famous for the Wilderness Road, and he's taking colonists to, well, his town named after him, Boonesboro. And the British tell him, you're not allowed to move there. You're breaking the proclamation of 1763. So guess what side Daniel Boone and those Kentuckians are on?
Colonies.
Yeah, the colonists. Because they want to be able to have that land. The frontier don't want to be told we can't move out west. Now, here's the part that we have that's going to be George Rogers Clark. During the Revolutionary War, he, and I believe he only had an army of like 300 soldiers. They're going to win out in the Ohio River Valley these two little forts. And in the whole scheme of things, don't seem real important until after the war is over. When the war is over and England loses, we're going to have Spain and France on our side. If you remember, all the fighting in the fighting that began in the 7 Years' War started over the Ohio River Valley. So do you think when England loses, France and Spain are on the winners, that they might want that land that they were originally fighting for 25 years before? So they are claiming it. Meanwhile, if you are Britain, do you want France to get that land? Do you want Spain to get that land? Do you want America to get that land? No. But of those three, who's the one that you want that you would prefer get it the most? The Americans. So in the Treaty of Paris of 1783, we will end up getting, and this is why I say, why were those two matters so important? Instead of our border ending at the Appalachian Mountains, we get all the land between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River. Because during that time, when France says this belongs to us, Spain says that belongs to them, because Spain will get back Florida. England says, no, the Americans won fair and square because Clark and his soldiers won these two little battles. And you change over time with those two little battles. Go back to the beginning of America's Story of Us, or if you think back to the frontier thesis, what is one of the reasons why people say that America became the great country it is?
Because we're always expanding.
Yeah, we're always expanding. We always had land. What if they didn't win those? What if Spain would have got that land, or France would have got that land? Could we have maybe been stuck just right there on the coast? Again, we don't know what would happen, but this is where you kind of lead to it. Which, kind of going ahead, we get all the way to the Mississippi River, except for, can we get all the way down the Mississippi River? Is that going to play into the future, that bottom part of the Mississippi River? So that's why you kind of look at it, those two little forks end up being like. That's the end of this section. All right, Taylor.